I'm thrilled to talk about self-assurance today. It's one of those themes that isn't all that common. I think, in fact, I spent my morning listening to Rod Carr and Kurt Leesfeld talk about self-assurance back in season 1. That podcast was recorded in April 2014. And it was amazing to get to see how far we've come in being able to talk about themes and theme dynamics, but also how much I still learn from listening to them talk about self-assurance. And one of the notes that I took was at that point, and I checked, it really hasn't changed. Only about 6% of our database have self-assurance as a dominant theme in the top 5. So it is one that's probably all the much more important to talk about so that we can really understand this language that we call common when we talk about the language of Clifton Strengths. Also, it's one of those themes that I find has quite a bit of magic to it in that it's such an internal set of talents, but it is in that influencing theme. And it's so, I think whether folks with self-assurance are aware of this or not, it sort of oozes out of their pores in a way that other people are attracted to and in a way that other people feel, which is really great for self-assurance and super interesting to me because self-assurance is about having your own internal compass. Anytime you hear that phrase, chances are that's the theme that we're talking about. Being able to trust your gut, also being able to even hear your gut. As I was listening to season 1 of Self-Assurance, I was thinking, well, you know what, I exude a lot of that kind of confident behavior, but self-assurance for me is 14. So, where does that come from? As you're listening to this today, I'd encourage you to think about where does your confidence come from? Because self-assurance and self-confidence are not necessarily the same thing. They do have a lot in common. I think there's a lot of similarities between confidence and assuredness. When we talk about self-assurance, and let's dive into that companion guide really to understand what this theme is all about. Really, it's being able to find that confidence from within, to understand that whatever you are up against, you and your abilities are going to be probably one of the greatest resources in overcoming a challenge or in attacking a goal. Lots of other themes find confidence from other places. I have strategic, and I feel like my confidence comes from thinking things through. Others, you could find confidence from empathy in being able to know explicitly that you're going to understand the feelings of other people and feel those feelings. With self-assurance, it comes from a trust in your own ability, a trust in your own understanding, and a trust in the work ethic that you know that you're going to bring to the table. If we read into that companion guide, we find things like no one sees exactly what you see, and you know that no one can make your decisions for you. There's quite a bit of independence in self-assurance. It can be quiet or loud, depending on other themes that surrounds it, but it is solid. It is strong. And I love this sentence, like the keel of a ship, it withstands many different pressures and keeps you on your course. The other day I was coaching a coach and she asked me a great question. She says, that sounds a lot like the theme of belief. Can you tell me how it's different? And we did, there are some similarities. Both belief and self-assurance have unwavering sort of stability to them. Belief, it tends to come from a set of values, which is a little more external, whereas self-assurance, it comes from within, from trusting your gut and your ability to course correct if needed. It falls in that influencing domain, which of course leaders who are dominant in our influencing themes know how to take charge, how to speak up, and how to make sure that their team is heard. So let's talk about what self-assurance looks like in a leader. So in an individual contributor, if self-assurance sounds like I can do this, then in a leader, it sounds like you can trust me. It might even sound like we can do this. That sort of extension beyond just how are you going through your daily personal to-do list or your personal tasks or even directing your personal life to how are you directing lives that affect others, that transference of being an individual contributor toward being a leader. I think it is also awareness of how previous lessons can enhance future ventures. So I was reading in our strengths-based leadership book and it said something about, admit when you failed. Of all the people I've spoken to who have self-assurance, I don't think very, very few of them would actually say they had failed because they see failure as part of the right decision to take, especially when they're trusting their gut. So maybe even beyond admitting failure, it's being able to translate how the lessons that you learned when something didn't go like you thought it would have led you to the right decision that you're making for the future. And think about ways that you can talk about that and you can communicate that to others because People want to follow confidence, people want to follow self-assurance, but people want to follow it even when they're anxious. And sometimes when others are anxious, it takes an extra 5 to 10% of illustrating what you're doing and why they should follow you. So being able to replay a little bit of, hey, I'm not only trusting my gut is based on my experience, and here's how I know that we're on the right track. Also, think about examining how you make decisions as a leader with self-assurance. It can be very easy for you to jump in and trust yourself as being the fix or yourself as being the tool. If you get real close to your thought-making process, I think you can catch opportunities to invest or lend that self-assurance to other people who can help you own pieces of it and really free you up to jump into the highest stakes places, the places that are going to take the most persistence or the most autonomy and independence. Find the best ways to share the certainty and the clarity that you feel. Think about phrases like, of course you can, of course we can, and think about what kind of inspiration and motivation and energy that gives to other people. Call and replay the successes of your team, of your client, of your industry in great detail. What I found to be true about with high self-assurance is brain power, and they save more files in their brain of success versus failure. And I think a lot of that comes from the ability to trust their gut, the ability to be intuitive. That is understanding what you should avoid when things are wrong, but it's also being up for a challenge and maybe even up for a fight. And that can lead to a really great highlight reel of when that's led you to something greater. So position yourself in a role that requires that kind of the kind of grit, but also position yourself in a place where you can be the first line of celebration to replay to your team what they've overcome and why they made the choices that they did and why those were correct. You are an agent of action if you've got high self-assurance. Ask yourself where you can lend your certainty through, hey, let's make it happen, or let's just go with our intuition on this one. And we'll get to talk to Sam here in a moment about some stories and some times in his life when that has happened and maybe sometimes when it hasn't. And I think that'll help you bring a little bit more clarity to the power of self-assurance is the gut, is the ability to trust that inner compass. I almost think about, for people with high self-assurance, the volume is dialed up a little bit higher into your intuition than it is with some other themes. So lean into that and think about how you can use that to its very best. The last thing I want to talk about before we introduce our great guest today is the needs of followers. So how can a leader with self-assurance exude trust, build trust, show compassion, provide stability, and inspire hope? We'll start with trust. I think it's an important exercise for leaders with self-assurance to think about what scares them. You probably won't stop based on fear, but it might add to your trust-building repertoire if you can put your fear into words. I think it's amazing for people to see your relationship with being scared, your relationship with fear, in that it's not that you're just bulletproof and you're not afraid of things, but the way that you attack things that you're afraid of is different and powerful and inspiring to others, and certainly can build some trust. Around compassion, I'd encourage leaders to ask yourself, who enhances your life? And how do you offer love to others? In many cases, self-assurance is very independent and is happy and successful alone. And that's not a horrible thing. I think it's a fantastic strength. It leads to a lot of resilience and persistence. But it's also important, I think, to think about how are you building those relationships with people who can make your life better. So pay attention to it. Around stability, for me, this one almost seems like perhaps the most obvious with self-assurance. But think about assembling a really solid team and tell them why you believe in them. Talk about the benefit of moving forward. My father, when I was growing up, when I was very young, was a fighter pilot, and today is still an airline pilot. And one of the things that he would always say is the only bad decision is not making a decision at all. And he was of this mindset of, you move forward, and if you've made the wrong choice, well, then make another one. And I think I hear he doesn't actually have self-assurance in his top 5, but I hear a lot of self-assurance in that quote. And so help people see the benefit in moving forward, the ability not to be paralyzed by hurdles, but to trust your gut and continue. And then around hope, What is your next ambitious goal and how can we aim higher? You probably, if you've got high self assurance, you probably see how things can be pushed to even better levels than other people would. So, with your own goals and your own organization's goals, think about making them big and don't let yourself ever off too easily, because that will diminish a lot of the fire that you bring. And I also think about it as something you can provide to others who maybe you're mentoring or you're developing, is how can you help people really stretch their goals beyond what they think is possible or logical, and into that place where their gut tells them they can do it. I think that there's a different space that you hit there with self assurance. It's a really beautiful one.